Over the years, there have been several companies that have become hated for their terrible business practices, whether that be Johnson & Johnson in their attempt to cover up the fact that their baby powder causes cancer, or oil companies like BP, which is responsible for the largest oil spill in history in 2010, or maybe you just hate Activision Blizzard for ruining Overwatch and World of Warcraft. All of these companies have garnered millions of people who now hate them for how they have decided to do business, but the nefarious company we'll be talking about today is virtually unknown to the general public, and once their bad behavior came to light, they ended up completely changing their company name in order to hide from the backlash. The company I'm referring to was known as Corizon Health for decades, but in the past year it has rebranded as YesCare and has continued their horrible business practices that have been going on for decades. Most people have never heard of Corizon Health, however they have been around since the 1970s and are a multi-billion-dollar company that was the nation's largest provider of prison healthcare services. They provided medical care for prisons, detention facilities, local jails, and even mental institutions. They were responsible for everything from basic needs like insulin all the way up to life-saving surgeries when medical emergencies arose. Now, what makes Corizon truly despised among those who have had to do business with them is twofold. The first issue is their continued attempt to place profit above patient care. Corizon regularly had to fight hundreds of medical malpractice lawsuits every single year around their mistreatment of inmates, and when the debt they accrued fighting all these lawsuits became too much, they initiated a controversial corporate restructuring that allowed them to rid themselves of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of settlement payments without having to pay any of it. Corizon has had claims of malpractice against them for decades and had over 475 active lawsuits against the company in July that are all now dismissed due to Corizon's restructuring into a new business. One of those cases was brought against them by the family of Hector Garcia, who was an inmate in a detention center in New Mexico, serving a 6-day sentence related to a past warrant violation. On the third day of his sentence, he was found crawling on the floor, vomiting and moaning in pain, but wasn't provided any medical care until the next day when the symptoms got worse. Hector was then seen by a Corizon nurse who briefly checked him and then claimed he was suffering from constipation, despite them knowing that he had a history of peptic ulcers. Hector's condition got worse over the next few hours without further medical aid, and he began to vomit dark brown fluid, which can often be a sign of internal bleeding. Despite all this, he was again denied further medical care, and Corizon medical staff decided to leave him in an observation cell overnight, which is when he began having hallucinations as well. The next morning, with his condition now critical, the medical staff once again showed their profit over patient care and refused to call an ambulance to rush Hector to the hospital, and instead loaded him into the back of a security van for transportation. While shackled in the back of the van, Hector went into cardiac arrest, and the next day was declared dead at the hospital. The footage shown was obtained after Hector's family sued Corizon for medical malpractice, but unfortunately will most likely never get a settlement now that Corizon has implemented their restructuring plan to void all lawsuit claims against them. Hector's case is not unusual, as there are hundreds of other people who suffered under the care of Corizon as well. Tracy Grissom filed a complaint in 2019 saying she was forced to live in her own feces for 4 months after Corizon contractors at the Alabama prison where she was held failed to provide a properly fitted ostomy bag. William Kelly filed a lawsuit against Corizon after his kidney cancer progressed from stage 1 to 4 while under Corizon Health and received no treatment until he was released from prison. It's important to note that Corizon has had documented cases of medical malpractice for decades and has had multiple opportunities to correct their mistakes, but hasn't done so. 5 years ago, they received national coverage after they allowed a young woman suffering from narcotic withdrawals to pass away under their care without receiving any medical aid despite her pleas for help.
Pitkin's attorneys say it was profit over public safety and patient safety. That's how they describe what led to 26-year-old Madeline Pitkin's death. She was arrested back in April of 2014 on a warrant for heroin possession. At the jail, she told medical staff there in Washington County she was a heroin user. She began suffering from dehydration and withdrawal. Repeatedly, she wrote notes begging for medical help. She never got it, and she died within a week. Lawyers say it was Corizon's decision to save money as the reason she was not taken to a hospital. Her parents hope uncovering what happened to her will help prevent other deaths, not just here, but around the country as well.
In all honesty, I could go on for hours covering the numerous medical complaints made against Corizon, but I think those should be enough to paint a picture of how this company has always put profit over the health care of inmates that were placed under their care. After facing mounting debt payments, including $10 million awarded to the parents of Madeline, Corizon realized this was hurting their profit and implemented one of the most diabolical business moves imaginable in order to rid themselves of having to pay out any of these claims. In 2022, Corizon implemented a controversial business practice known as a divisional merger, or commonly referred to as a Texas two-step. This law, which is rarely used, allowed Corizon to create a new company known as YesCare and transfer all of their assets, which included business contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, to that new business. In the meantime, Corizon's original company was renamed as Tehum and maintains all the lawsuit debt and current court cases against them. Shortly after the transfer of assets to the new company was complete, the original company, Tehum, declared bankruptcy, and all lawsuits against them were closed since they no longer had any money to their name. The new company, YesCare, is not responsible for any debts or lawsuits the former company had, and now gets a fresh start to make billions a year in profit without any of the negativity of being associated with Corizon. The controversial Texas two-step has only been used to shield a company from lawsuits in this matter 5 times since the law was created in 1989. From 2017 to 2020, the companies of Georgia Pacific, as well as Saint-Gobain and Trane Technologies, all used this law to get rid of billions of dollars worth of asbestos settlements they were forced to pay out from lawsuits. In 2021, Johnson & Johnson did the same thing, trying to protect their main company from the settlements related to the cancer-causing baby powder that they had been selling for years. In this case, since Johnson & Johnson had more than enough money to pay all the settlements they owed, the judge ended up throwing out their bankruptcy claims and forced them to pay out the settlements anyway. I really can't stress enough what a shady tactic this is to avoid paying debts that companies owe. Corizon Health, on top of the hundreds of malpractice lawsuits they face, owed millions of dollars in unpaid wages to employees, as well as millions in unpaid debts to vendors they did business with. Using this controversial law protects the new company they formed from being sued for malpractice, since YesCare is considered a new company and had nothing to do with what happened during the operations of Corizon. All the lawsuits that were active against Corizon have now been permanently stayed, and victims have no way of recovering any sort of compensation from the new YesCare, and instead have to try and get some sort of compensation from the former Corizon, which is now being picked apart of what few assets it has in bankruptcy court. From there, the situation actually gets even stranger, because during the bankruptcy process for Corizon, it was discovered that the judge who was the mediator in the case was allegedly in a secret romantic relationship with an attorney working for YesCare. This soap opera turn of events may actually end up being the saving grace for the families looking to collect settlements from Corizon, as their attempted bankruptcy has now been put on hold as investigators now look into the shady dealings of the judge as well as Corizon. The extra media attention around this whole ordeal has led many to now question if the Texas two-step law should be revoked to prevent shady dealings like this from happening in the future. As this gets more attention, several senators have now issued a joint statement to Corizon Health objecting to their bankruptcy, claiming they need to honor the debts they owe instead of using this shady tactic to remove the debt from their business. While I doubt the letter sent by the senators will do anything, it will ultimately bring more attention to this whole story and hopefully cause those in charge of the bankruptcy proceedings to reconsider allowing this deal to go through. But as of now, YesCare, the new version of Corizon Health, is now operating normally and continues much as it did for decades, just with a bright new name on its door to cover up the years of negligent behavior that they now want swept under the rug and forgotten.